Good morning, church. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Let me tell you, it's really an honor to receive that on behalf of a lot more people than me. Some amazing people that I got to spend the last few weeks with the heart to go and just help. And some of those people are all of you who made it possible for us to go help. And so thank you, Pastor Steve and Becky, for sending that prayer request out. And the prayers was what we needed probably most. And then, of course, money. It wasn't. It was a big effort. This really started for me, honestly, if I'm being honest, kind of selfishly. I wanted to help my friend. Aziz is not just my interpreter. He was my teammate. Like a lot of people might imagine in the military, you have a big unit and you have one interpreter. It was a little different for me. I was part of a JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command Task Force. I was called a AFO, Advanced Force Operator. So it's kind of the best way to explain that as like being undercover. Like I went out into the mountains and back alleys of Afghanistan and Pakistan to go and find targets of the Taliban, who were like the top guys that were leading some of the terrorist efforts. And I was partnered with Aziz. He was my interpreter. He was my teammate. We went out and did operations together. And when we came back from those operations, I went to his house. I didn't go back to the base. I went to his house. I lived with his wife and kids and ate dinner with their families and played with their kids. And that's the relationship we had for 8 deployments. And this guy saved my life multiple times. I can tell you every time we were in a dangerous area, like if we were in a Taliban village and I was walking around a corner in the middle of the night, he wouldn't let me go first. He would refuse to let me go first. He had to go first. That's just who he is and the relationship that we had. And not only did he save my life multiple times, but he saved some of our friends' lives. In numerous occasions, we went out and recovered special operations guys in bad situations where he always put his life selflessly aside for U.S. service members because he believed in our mission. He's never even been to America. He believed in America's mission to fight terrorism on their soil. And he believed in, as an Afghan patriot, he believed in a free Afghanistan so his daughters could be educated and free. And so he's an amazing human being. And I owed him a life debt. And at 6 years, I was in the SIV, Special Immigrant Visa process, to get his visa to come here. This is a guy that had been polygraphed every 6 months, had top secret level clearances, totally witting and vetted at the highest level of special operations for the United States. And it took 6 years, and his visa process was just kept getting rejected. It's a system that was never meant to succeed. And so as I seen what was unfolding in Afghanistan, and we were given an announcement date that we were going to pull out of Afghanistan, I knew that I had to get my friend out. And so Dan, who was in that video, and we came up with a plan that we were going to go get him and his wife and his kids. And as we started putting the pieces together, putting some former special operations guys together to do this, putting some money together, we were planning our operation, and one of our team members identified 3,000 orphans. And these were orphans of former Afghan soldiers and interpreters that had died. And these orphans were alone, and they were going to be left to the Taliban. And we just kind of got together as a team and said, hey, we can't just go get Aziz. We have the skills, we have the abilities, we have the network and resources. If we're going to do this, let's help as many people as we can. And so we made a decision to do that. We didn't know how we were going to do it. We knew we couldn't. The United States military was not going to help us. And so we have a lot of relationships around the world from decades of special operations experience. And so one of our team members had a direct relationship with the Crown Prince of the UAE. Now, I could say that now. I couldn't say that a few weeks ago. But we went to the Crown Prince and in the royal family, and we told them our plan. We demonstrated to them that we had the ability to pull this off operationally. And we said, we don't have a lot of time to discuss it. These people need help now. And they said yes. They gave us not only a Joint Operations Center on their military base, but 5 generals to have access to some military resources, an airfield, which is extremely expensive, I learned, to land it. I guess it costs like $500,000 to land a plane on an airfield. So it's extremely expensive to utilize that. They offered us that. They offered us 2 C-17 planes, very big planes, and military pilots, and a humanitarian center for 4,100 people, including the doctors and social workers and everything that would be required in a humanitarian center. And in 12 days, or 10 days, and with 12 of us going in and out of Afghanistan, we were able to get 12,000 people out to safety. And so one of the things I was most proud of, and it's a question that a lot of people have had to us, it's like, who are these people, right? Who did you get out? Did you get out 6,000 good guys and 6,000 Taliban? Well, I can't speak for everybody else's process, but I can speak for our process, and it's something I'm very proud of. We knew right away we needed to get not just people out, but the right people. So we put a team together in Washington, D.C., we call it the JOC, Joint Operations Center, and we put we blasted out through some private networks that we were going to be helping. We said we were telling people that we want to help SIVs, which are the interpreters, and their families. We want to help vulnerable women, a lot of widows and women that would be vulnerable, journalists, school teachers, aid workers that the Taliban would go after, because we knew right away that the first thing the Taliban said is we want all the women 15 to 45. They sent a memo out to all the mullahs, which are like the mayors, give us the list because we want them. And so we went to go after these women. We went to go after their children, the orphans, persecuted Christians because they had already started killing them, and Americans. So that's what we blasted out. In a period of 2 weeks, we got 29,000 requests for help. Our operations center worked 24/7. No kidding. People were sleeping like an hour and a half, 2 hours for 2 weeks straight. And they categorized these lists, really triage it based on evidence that we had that these people were who they said they were. They forwarded that to Abu Dhabi, which is where we ran the Joint Operations Center there. We built rescue target packages from that. And so our team in Abu Dhabi and our ground team, which was outside the wire of Kabul Airport, HKIA Airport, we coordinated those people to link up outside the wire and then get them on that airport. And we did it very carefully. We did it with a bona fides process that I can't say exactly, but we really used like 7 points of authentication to make sure we were getting the people, the good guys that we were intended to get. We were moving such big numbers that the military had to accommodate us, and they gave us a ramp, our own ramp out of the 9 ramps they had on the airport. We began to manage all the commercial air because the military didn't want to do it. They were just turning away commercial flights for humanitarian service. So we started managing all that. We had our own hangar. And as we were bringing people into the UAE Humanitarian Center, I tell you that I cannot be more proud of these people in the UAE. The care they provided these people, the facilities, everything we asked for, they did. They had doctors and social workers. We were like, hey, the kids are getting bored. And the next day they were building a playground. They didn't put a swing set out. Like the playgrounds you guys have in the Woodlands, like those kind of playgrounds. They were just building playgrounds, and the food, we were having like 3 women a day. Afghans are pregnant a lot. They were having like 3 babies a day being delivered there. I didn't think about that before, about delivering babies. We were just rescuing people. And I had no idea we would have to be delivering babies. But they thought of it. And so all these things were taking place. And I remember going into the humanitarian center, and I seen Aziz for the first time, and I hadn't seen him in years. We've been in touch, but I hadn't seen him in years, and when I seen him, he got a lot bigger, and so did I. And I seen him, and right away, we just hugged each other, and we both started crying. And then all his kids ran up, and they called me Uncle Chad, and they were like, Uncle Chad, and I started crying some more. And I was standing in the middle of there, and we had 9,000 people in the humanitarian center when I was there with him. And I remember just telling him, because we were really close, I'm like, bro, because our relationship, because I love you so much and all of you've done for me, and me and Dan were coming here to get you, that's how it started. But look at these 9,000 people that we were able to get, and just this personal relationship, how I grew to that. It was just so overwhelming. And I kind of hit this moment to where I kind of paused, because everything was so fast. It was kind of all one day because we wasn't sleeping. And in this moment where I realized, how the heck did this happen? When did I get one person, and then next thing you know, we got 12,000 people. And I promise you, I'm not smart enough to pull this off. We have a lot of skills and talents in our team and relationships. We were not capable of pulling this off. And I was like, this is like a Gideon's story. This is like if you know the story of Gideon, God uses the least capable person to fight off this evil nation. And Gideon thinks he's going to be smart, so he gets a real big team. And then God's like, no, then you guys will get the credit. He whittles it down to 300 people, and they do this impossible thing that can only be orchestrated by God. And that's how I look at these 12,000 people. The news keeps giving me credit for it, but I'm telling you, I am no way capable of it. It was totally God orchestrated, from the people he brought together to the resources, financial resources, because this is very expensive. This church gave $66,000. This is a small church in Atascadero, California, and they work so hard every year to give Mighty Oaks like $5,000 a year. And it's like so thankful that that's what they give every year. They raised the same amount, $68,000 to help with these people. This little small church. And so I think we're right now in about a month now of raising. We're right about $2 million to do this, and so it's been pretty incredible to see people getting behind doing it, and you know, we have a lot left to do, because like I said, that Gideon story of God using, you know, getting the credit for it. God has really orchestrated this, but He hasn't taken that burden off of our heart yet, and there's so many people left to save. Forget what the news says. Like, this is uncontestable. There's at least 5,000 Americans still there. At least 5,000 Americans still there. I mean, you just listen to the White House's math. They said there was 15,000. They rescued 6,000. That doesn't equal 200. So, I'm sorry. I'm not very good at math. But it doesn't equal 200. There's 5,000 Americans still there. There's at least we were in a meeting with the Joint Chiefs last week. Don't throw anything at me, because we have to meet with these people. We were in a meeting with them, and they said there's still 142,000 people that are going to be persecuted by the Taliban that have to get out. And so that's how we've been sanctioned by them. We're going to continue to move forward. I'm leaving in a few days. I'm going to go back overseas. We're going to continue rescue efforts. I can't say what I'm doing, but we are going to continue. So, you know, keep supporting. More than anything, be praying for not only our team's safety, but the safety of those people that are stuck there, because the executions is horrific. Like the level of desperation. Like at HK Airport, imagine, you're a mom or a dad, and you have a baby, and you're so desperate to help your baby to not be under the Taliban that you kiss it goodbye, and you put it on top of a crowd and let it crowd surf to the fence of the airport. You send it away, knowing you're never going to see it again. And then the people are throwing the babies over the wall because they think the military is on the other side. What they don't know is on the other side of it, they can't see, is 5 feet high of concertina wire and like 20 feet deep. It's 100 degrees outside. And my buddy Joe counted 6 of these babies just dead in the wire. That's the level of desperation. People are trampling each other. That desperation that we saw at the airport is worse now, because the media is gone. America's gone. They're going door to door executing people. I got videos from some of our safe houses I can't share because it would identify the people that videoed it. But they're stuffing people, and they're going collecting people, stuffing them in trunks, Christians, Americans, interpreters, and they're driving them off, and they're executing them. That's happening right now. We have to continue helping these people. And for me, like, I kind of just feel convicted by God. Like, if we have the ability and the know-how and the relationships to do it, then we must do it. We have to do it. And so we're not going to stop. So in addition, the ones that we got out, we feel a responsibility for. 8,911 of them that we kind of feel responsible for. We're going to make sure that they go kind of a home to home. The home that they lost, because they lost everything. They're going to come here, and we're going to make sure that we oversee these people through the State Department, that they have the dignity and respect that they deserve in that process, and not treat it like, like they're in a jail, because that's kind of what some of these humanitarian centers are. The one in UAE is not like that. So I could spend my whole 45 minutes up here talking about Afghanistan. I have to stop myself, and I have to talk about no, because that's the series we're on. And so I'll say no to continue talking. But I say the first thing this week was when I was like, God put this burden on my heart. I was like, going back to Afghanistan? Like, no. Like, I've already been there like 8 times. I'm not going back. And then I told Kathy, I think God's calling me to go back to Afghanistan to do this. And she's like, no. But luckily she's supportive, and she knew, she got it. And she said yes. And so we went. So today I'm going to talk about saying no to entitlement and victimhood, because, man, entitlement and victimhood has plagued our nation, and we have to say no to it. But I want to start off with a story from a different time in Afghanistan. I was, as I said, I was part of a JSOC task force in this AFO capacity. There was like me and one of my buddies. He's a Navy SEAL. The two of us are dressed in regular clothes. We're in a Toyota Prado, which is like a Toyota 4Runner. We didn't have much for weapons. We each had like a pistol kind of tucked away in our waistband. We were driving into the capital city of Kabul on a road called Jalalabad Road. And while we were driving, I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw a truck, which was like a Hilux Toyota pickup truck, loaded with guys that looked like the Taliban. Very stereotypical tribal clothing, very dirty, coming out of the mountains. They all had AK-47 assault rifles. One of them had an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Like, these guys were definitely up to no good and about to start some trouble. And I wanted to make sure they weren't following us. And so before I say that, I'll give you kind of a picture of, we had a joke. How many Taliban can you fit in a pickup truck? So the answer is one more, right? So they piled in this truck. That's to give you a picture of what they look like. They're like piled in this truck, and I'm like, we'll make sure they're not following us. So I did a technique called deviating your route. So I'm on Jalalabad Road, and I go and I make the block. And as I make the block, they continue to follow us. And as I turn right on my original route, and they turn and follow me, it confirms that, in fact, they were following me. It also lets them know that I knew they were following me. So it started a pretty aggressive chase. They started trying to push us off the road. And I made a decision to go into the city of Kabul to lose them in the busy traffic. I know everyone here thinks like Rayford traffic's like the worst in the world, but I promise you, it has nothing on third world traffic, right? No stoplights, no street signs, thousands of people trying to get to one place. It's so congested, it's crazy to get through. I was trying to use that traffic to lose them, and it kind of backfired on me. I got to this major intersection called Masood Circle. And when I got to Masood Circle, there was like one pathway through it that I could squeeze through, and all of a sudden the traffic began to stop, and I couldn't get through. I'm trying to make my way through that, trying to force my way through, and somehow their truck got around me, cut me off about 20 yards in front of me in a roadblock situation. I remember a few guys jumped out the back, but probably my most vivid memory was the passenger stepping out. You could tell immediately he was in charge. But probably why I remember it so well is he was just so cool about it. He was like taking his time, closed the door behind him, turned and looked at me. He had his AK-47 in one hand, and he looked up at me and gave me a hand signal to stop my vehicle. Really bad situation. In my training experience, it's called being stuck on the X. Right? The X is it's an ambush site. It's a kill zone. A couple of rules you learn in training about the X is rule number one, you have to be able to recognize that you're on the X. Right? You got to know you're in a bad situation. Rule number two, it's pretty easy. Even a bonehead like me can figure it out. You have to get off the X. Right? You got to move. If you stay there, something bad's going to happen. So I'm so thankful for military training. Every year we go to a place called Bill Scott Raceway. We crash cars and training for all these scenarios. And one of the scenarios is a roadblock situation. You execute a ramming technique. And so I did exactly what I was trained to do. I hit the gas, I aimed my vehicle towards theirs, and probably one of my favorite memories of Afghanistan is when I smashed into that truck and it spun out the way. It was little Taliban guys flying through the air. A few of them jumped right before I hit it. And as the truck spun out of the way, there was like this perfect pathway now for me to get out this intersection. But there was one more obstacle. I got to tell you this part. There's like one more obstacle. There's like this 100-year-old policeman in his perfect like pressed uniform. If you've ever been to a third world country, you know these intersection cops. Their whole life is like that intersection. They own it. And that was him. Like he's like blowing his whistle at me. He's like beep beep, and I was like, I am not stopping. I'm going to run him over to get out of there. And so I started heading towards him. And what I love about Afghans, probably how to survive thousands of years of war, they always jump on a winning team. So when he saw I was going to run him over, he like jumped on my team and was giving me a thumbs up and smiling. He's blowing his whistle, stopping cars, directing traffic. And he got me off that intersection and probably saved my life that day. And, I don't know what those bad guys wanted on Masood Circle, but I know this. If we would have stopped on the X, if we would have stopped on Masood Circle, we would have put up a heck of a fight, but the truth is we likely would have been killed or taken. And, I came here today to tell you, you don't have to go to Afghanistan to find yourself on the X. All of us in life could probably recall a time that we found ourselves on the X. And maybe you're on it today. Maybe that's where you're at in your life right now, where you're stuck in a situation and have no idea how you get about to move forward. The question in life isn't if you're going to find yourself on the X, because you will. It's when you do, what are you going to do? In my own experience of my life and the work that I do at Mighty Oaks Foundation, dealing with thousands of military warriors suffering combat trauma, essentially stuck on the X, I've really learned it comes down to one thing, and that's a choice. A choice whether we're going to stay on the X's in our life and die, literally and metaphorically, or we're going to say, no. No, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to get off that X, and I'm going to move forward. What are we actually saying no to? For today's message, I'll say we're saying no to passivity. We're saying no to victimhood, pride, entitlement. I think if we could go less off the X in the Masood Circle, Afghanistan, go more metaphorically, stuck in the X in our life today. most of us will stay there because of pride, entitlement, victimization. All those are kind of in the same vein, and they're all equally deadly. The truth is, God didn't just create us, but he created us for a purpose. We can never fulfill that purpose if we stay on those X's. He has a plan and promise for our lives. In Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and to give you a future." When you find yourself on the X, it's very easy to say yes to victimhood, to say yes to entitlement, to be passive. It's so easy to say, all this was done to me. I had no participation. I'm a victim of this situation. So because of that, I can implode and stay here for a while. Nothing could be more dangerous in those moments. In those moments, we have to say no to those things and press forward, trusting God's promise. If we could do that, we'll find victory not only in that situation, but in all the battles of life. Now, I wish I could stand up here and tell you that I always moved forward when I found myself on the X, that I said no to passivity and entitlement and victim mentalities, that I trusted or even knew the promises of God. But that's not the case. In 2007, I found myself on the X again. I came home from my 8th and last deployment from Afghanistan, and I was dealing with extreme frustration, anger, depression, suicide ideations, a near divorce in my family, diagnosed with PTSD. I was on the X dealing with all these things, and I didn't follow those 2 simple rules. One, I didn't recognize that I was on the X. I didn't want to admit it because of my pride or shame, because of my entitled attitude. And because I didn't recognize the situation I was in, I couldn't follow the second rule, which was to get off the X. I chose to stay there for a period of almost 3 years. And I'll emphasize, I chose to stay there. And there were many things that I believe kept me on the X. But when I look back to those darkest moments of that time in my life, and I'm really honest with myself and being honest with you, what kept me there most was my own passivity. I adopted a mindset of entitlement and victimhood based on my own pride that almost cost me everything. Entitlement, by the way, entitlement is a disease. I'll say that again. Entitlement is a disease, and personal responsibility is the cure. Imagine if our culture got what I just said. Entitlement, when I say entitlement is a disease, it means it's contagious. A lot more than COVID. And it's when somebody has entitlement in their life, it spreads through groups and cultures, and and there's people in our culture that are using entitlement as a weapon to divide our nation and to keep certain people groups oppressed and down. And it is literally a disease in our country. But the cure to it, the vaccine to it, is personal responsibility. Owning our situations, taking personal responsibility and move out of it. To get off the X in our life, we must say no to entitlement. We must say yes to personal responsibility. We must say yes to God's promise for our lives. I could go way back. Usually when I'm giving my testimony, I usually go way back to my childhood, but for the sake of time today, I'm going to start on 20 years ago on September 11th. We just celebrated, or if you want to say celebrated, had the 20th anniversary of September 11th, 2001. Unfortunately, it was during a time where we gave Afghanistan back to the Taliban. But I remember, for me, I was a sergeant at 3rd Force Recon Company, the Marine Corps Special Operations Unit. I was a team leader, and I remember sitting with my wife, Kathy, on the couch, watching over and over as every news clip rolled over and over again. Those planes crashing into the World Trade Center building. And I knew watching that, because of my job, I was like, my life is about to be different. It's never going to be the same. It was very clear to me. I think everyone in the military, everyone probably knew that, especially people in the military knew that now life's about to be different. No one went to the military, like, to their units, like, oh my gosh, are we going to war? Everyone was like, hey, what's up, sir? Like, when are we going to do this? Like, let's go make this right. That was the mentality of the military. And by the way, if any military people in here and you've been watching the news and thinking that, and believing the lie that we lost the war in Afghanistan, let me set the record straight. The military did not lose the war in Afghanistan. Washington, D.C. lost their part. But we went there. We went there to capture and kill those responsible for what happened to us on September 11th, and we did that. We did that well. I can tell you over 100 missions, special operations missions that I went on, and I can't name one of them that was a failure. Washington, D.C. made decisions afterwards. We did that, and there's been continued failures there, but I want to make sure that we know as a military community we did the right thing. Many military warriors are suffering with that truth right now. For me, I wanted to go so bad, and it wasn't until 2003 I made it on a JSOC task force and got to go and serve in that capacity. Incredible opportunity. I went 8 times, and despite the hardships I've had from it, I will never, ever regret my opportunity to serve in that capacity. When I went there at first, I was a much different person than I am today. I would have thought that I was completely ready to do that job. I had been in special operations for 10 years. I was extremely trained to do my job. I was with the best people I could be with. We had a very clear and focused mission. The military talks about these 4 pillars of resiliency: mind, body, spirit, social. That's kind of, if you have those things, if you have all 4 of those things, you should be good to go to be able to do what you need to do, see whatever you're going to see, and bounce back. I would have said I had those things, right? Mentally, I was extremely motivated, and I knew my job very well. Physically, I was in the best shape of my life. And socially, I was literally with the top tier 1 JSOC special operations unit. I was with the best guys I could be with. I was very privileged to be with these guys. And then spiritually, my spiritual foundation, well, I had the word Christian stamped on my dog tag, but I didn't really think much about what that meant. And the reason why I think it's important to point out is because while I was really strong in these 3 pillars, the 4th pillar, my spiritual foundation, was really just a kind of surface level thing. And under the pressure of something like Afghanistan, it was the catalyst that almost destroyed me. In the beginning of Afghanistan, I made this decision because Kathy was like calling me and saying like, "Hey, I'm praying for you." I'm like, "What are you praying for? Like, this place is evil. There's no God here." Like, I remember thinking that, I thought it was the presence of evil there, or I thought it was the absence of God, but it was really the presence of evil that was kind of feeling there. And I made this decision, I can remember making it, that I thought I could not be a warrior and be a person of faith. I thought the 2 couldn't coexist. And the reason I believe I thought that is because I would always go to church before, and my family would go to church. My wife really dragged me to church, and I've seen all these men in the church that I thought were weak. And I'm sorry if that offends anybody, but it's just the truth. That was my mentality. I'm like, I want to be a warrior. I don't want to be like these guys in the church. Like, I'm not joining a men's group. I'm not going to play soccer with these guys on Sunday, play softball with these guys on Sunday. Like, that's not who I was. And the reason I believe I seen that is because the truth is there is a lot of that in the church still to this day. Weak, passive men not being the men that God called us to be in the church. Good. And so, and I don't feel bad about calling that out because it's important. And so when I had to make a decision to be a warrior, I believe that I had to choose between the 2. I believe I had to be, can I be a warrior and do these violent things to other human beings, or can I be a person of faith? And I chose I could do that later. I'm going to put my faith on a shelf right now. And by the way, I'll make sure you know that I know now that there's no one more strong on the battlefield of Afghanistan or battlefield of life than men of God. And I wish I knew that then. Because I didn't know that, I made the decision to move God out of my life, out of my heart, and I left a giant hole inside of me that over the following years, I filled with hate and rage and anger and bitterness, and really a darkness took over me. And I felt like that worked really well in Afghanistan. Like being intense, being violent. I felt like that worked really well. But where it didn't work well was 24 hours later when I'd be home, fly home, and I'd be with my wife and children, and I couldn't flip a light switch and be a husband and father and Mr. Rogers, the friendly neighbor. Like, I was still like this angry, intense dude. And it just trickled over my home. And I'm always ashamed to say, but it's important to say that my home was not a very happy place for my family, and probably not a safe place. I would yell at my wife and children like I was a Marine Corps drill instructor. I'd throw things, I'd break things, punch holes in the wall, and just throw temper tantrums like a complete lunatic. I remember one time I was coming home for my daughter's birthday, and she was so excited that Dad was going to be home for her birthday. And my daughter's like this self-proclaimed princess, even worse now that she's older. And I didn't know there was such thing as a half birthday until I had a daughter, but there's such thing as half birthdays. And so her birthday is like a really big deal. And I'm there for her birthday, and she's complaining about the icing on her cake. Something super simple. And I totally flipped out, and I picked up my little girl's birthday cake and threw it against the wall and destroyed my little girl's birthday. I remember in that moment thinking like, who does something like that? What kind of dad behaves that way? And that was just one example of me being totally out of control. And when I get out of control like that, I knew it was, but if I stopped and if I backed down and didn't double down on it, then it was like an admission of guilt. So I would just like dig my heels in and continue to behave that way. And I started realizing like I needed to distance myself from my family. So instead of correcting the behavior, I just distanced myself and stayed as busy as I could, deployed as much as I could, went to as much training as I could. I just kind of figured I'd just deal with that later. And over time, this anger and frustration started to manifest in these physiological symptoms that I never in a million years thought I would deal with. My arms would go numb, my face would go numb. I felt like my throat was swelling shut, like I couldn't breathe. Sometimes I feel like I had like 1,000-pound weight on my chest, and I was just, my heart was just going to stop. These are signs of panic attacks, and I didn't want to say anything to the guys I worked with because I knew they would think I was weak and I'd be peered out and pushed out of my job. And I went to mental health. I had a top secret SCI clearance. I would probably lose my clearance. So I kept it to myself. Even went to a local doctor. They gave me some anti-anxiety medication, which I threw away. I'm like, I'm not taking that. And these symptoms got much worse. I started having these moments where I was in some intense situations in Afghanistan where I had what's called disassociation, where your mind feels like it separates from your body. You almost like see yourself like in a video game. Everything's a little delayed. And then I would like forget things. I would kind of wake up out of a fog. And so this situation was getting much worse. During the very end of my time there, we had a scenario where 12 people got captured and killed, 2 Americans, 10 Afghans. You might not think the Afghans are as big of a deal, but to me, these were the guys that I lived in their homes and with their families. And these are my brothers. I love these guys. And they loved me, and they would have died for me, and I would have died for them. And in fact, I do believe they did die for me. And if I was hanging on by a thread in that moment, that thread was probably broken. Them being killed resulted in some things falling apart in our operation that really put me in another like high-level risk of danger to continue doing what we were doing, and we continued anyway. And there was one operation that I went on, and I came back and realized that I didn't remember 2 weeks of my life. And I realized I wouldn't only put myself in danger, but I was putting other people in danger as well. And so I finally spoke up and said something. I was brought home. I was put before a clinical psychologist and diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I could spend hours up here talking to you about what PTSD is and what it isn't. I don't believe it's a disorder. A lot of people agree with me on that. I wrote a whole book on it. I mean, it's not a disorder when your body does exactly what it's designed to do based on seeing and doing things that you were never intended to see or do. It's our body's natural response that God created us and designed us to protect ourselves. Well, while I don't believe it's a disorder, the symptoms are very real. Coming home from Afghanistan that last time, to explain to you the level of panic that I had and panic attacks, it's really hard to explain unless you ever experienced it before. People sometimes say, I was in traffic the other day and had a panic attack. I'm not minimizing that. What I'm saying is much different. Like the level of panic that I'm describing is imagine being in a chain at the bottom of a swimming pool and you're drowning. Just imagine in your mind the level of panic you'd be while you're drowning. Like how much would you fight for one breath of air? But you never drown, you never die. You had that state of panic 24/7. And on top of that, the level of shame I felt. I mean, I had worked my whole life to be a Marine. Like my sister's here right now. I remember going out running 10 miles in the rain when I was like 15 years old. Like just wanting to prepare myself, wanted to be a Marine so bad, become a Recon Marine, making it to Force Recon and then to JSOC. And then there's this incredible operation that I got to be a part of. Like I worked my whole life to be in that moment. It would be like if I played football and made it to the NFL and made it to the Super Bowl, which would never happen because I'm 5'3", but you get the point, right? I worked my whole life to make it this moment, and then I failed in the game-winning play. Like, I was embarrassed. Like, I felt ashamed. And so I'm dealing with all those things, and my wife and my counselor were trying to find something for me to do to snap me out of it, and they talked me to getting on those wrestling mats and doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, it wasn't anything new to me. I say I did it since I was little, but I'm still little. I did it. I started martial arts when I was 5 years old and did judo and jiu-jitsu and everything I could be involved in martial arts. And so, and I'd already fought professionally as an MMA fighter on the side in the military, and I was undefeated, so I was pretty good at it. And so when I got on those mats the first time, it was like I found the cure. I couldn't think about Afghanistan and then be grappling with my buddy because he's going to beat me up. I have to be focused. And so I felt like I found the cure. This was healthy for me. And like some people will climb in that bottle of alcohol or take drugs, that's what I did with jiu-jitsu. And don't get me wrong, like I still love jiu-jitsu. This month I actually get my 4th degree black belt from Carlson Gracie Jr. It's a big accomplishment for me. Thank you. But while I love jiu-jitsu, you could take a medicine for being sick and you could abuse that medicine. And that's what I did with jiu-jitsu. Like I said, I still train jiu-jitsu every day. Pastor Steve knows like the most stressful job on the planet is being in ministry. It's so frustrating. It'd be so easy if it wasn't for people. But because people are so difficult, like I have stressful days, and when I do, I go to the gym and I find like some 20-year-old stud and I choke him out. And it makes me feel better. By the way, there's no better time to minister to someone than when you're choking them unconscious. They're like, you choke the hell out. You can choke the hell out of them. So that was kind of, yeah. But I took this thing that was good for me and I totally abused it and I didn't get better. And in fact, I believe looking back, it made me worse because I just hid in it and I kind of abused the success of it. I was very successful. We opened this gym right here on Rayford, ended up with like 1,000 students, which was, made us financially successful. I started fighting professionally again. I made it to 18-2, which is a good record as a professional. I was ranked number 6 in the world. I won a world title belt. And so on the outside, it looked like, everything was good. But underneath this fake facade of success was a very broken family still. Me dealing with constant panic attacks, anxiety, depression, all these things that we were dealing with. My marriage began to fall apart. Kathy and I would often sleep at the gym or at a friend's house because of fights, or I'd sleep in my kid's bedroom. Probably the loneliest place that Kathy and I say we've ever been is not being deployed in Afghanistan, but in our own bed with our backs turned towards each other and just a dead marriage. And in that state, it didn't take long for me to seek attention from other women. And I found it, and I ended up in tons of inappropriate relationships that I shouldn't have been talking to girls that I was talking to, and then ultimately into an affair, and which led to me and Kathy sitting down and telling our family we were getting divorced, and we filed for divorce. We sold our home, and we moved in 2 separate apartments with 12-month leases, so we were pretty committed to that decision. Kathy ended up going into a local church here. She ended up going into Woods Edge, and she went there really to find just the right people to be around, not to be around toxic people. She wanted to be around the right people. And there she would go, and I always stand on kind of when I'm speaking, I always think of that left side because people would say that she would go stand on it against this wall there in the middle of the week and pray for me. And she would collapse crying. And you would wonder what she would pray during, while I'm betraying her that way. And she would pray, God, let me see Chad the way you see Chad. Let me love Chad the way you love Chad. And let me forgive Chad the way you forgave Chad. That's what she would pray for me when I was in no way deserving of that. Because meanwhile, I was like off, like within 2 days, I had my apartment set up, total like bachelor pad, everything hung up, furniture in, pictures on the wall. And I'm always ashamed to say, but it's actually disgusts me to say, but it's important that I say. I didn't put my family pictures in my apartment. I put them all on a shelf in my closet because, I didn't want people to see my family. And I'm in this apartment and I'm focused on this big fight. I had this big fight booked at the Toyota Center on Showtime, and the event was called Strike Force. It was the number 2 event in the world at the time. And I had this big fight, and I'm focused on this fight. And during this fight, I had all these people around me that were telling me everything I wanted to hear and not what I needed to hear. They were telling me like things like, yeah, she never understood you, you got married young, your God has a better plan for you, someone else for you. They were just pumping me up, telling me everything I wanted to hear. I had absolutely no accountability in my life. And there's no more dangerous place people to be in this world, especially men, than to be with accountability. Much more dangerous than Afghanistan. I had none. And I really just kind of embraced it and fed off of it. And so now I'm fighting this giant fight in the Toyota Center. And of my 18 wins, I have 17 finishes. Some I'm super proud of in jiu-jitsu, by the way. So it's 70, and this was my one decision. And if you're like a fight fan, this was like a Rocky Balboa fight. Every round, me and Roberto De Leon, my opponent, knocked each other down. He punched me, knocked me down. I'd kick him in the face, knock him down. It was back and forth. We get to the end. I realized I didn't finish the fight. I was going to the decision. And the first judge calls it for me. The second judge calls it for Roberto De Leon, so it's going to be a split decision. I'm thinking, man, I just lost my first professional fight. And then the third judge calls it for me. My hands raised, like everybody's cheering. I remember being super excited, all the weight of the pressure of the fight come off of me. And if you can imagine like being in the center of the Toyota Center, you get 10,000 people, it's very like deafening loud. But like there was this moment to where it felt like everything got quiet. And I was thinking like, I just fought so hard for this stupid win on my record. And meanwhile, my family's like devastated. And I think I walked out of that cage tonight with my head held down. I went home to my apartment by myself, laid in my bed and my mind's spinning. You couldn't have sleep after a big fight like that anyway. My mind's spinning and I'm thinking of everyone I blamed for my situation. Like my father who, had a rough childhood. My father was a Marine Vietnam veteran. And then people in the military that I blame for everything. And if you're in the military at all, there's always people to blame, right? And then my wife, like she never understood me. She never got it. So all these people I blamed, and I realized like I'm the common denominator. I'm the problem. And so if I could remove myself from the situation, it's going to be better. And this thought came over me that maybe my family would be sad without me, but they would be better off. Like maybe my family would be sad without me, but they'd be better off. And if you guys don't know, that same hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of over 20 veterans every single day. That maybe their family, their friends, their loved ones would be sad without them, but they'd be better off. And we have over 20 veterans a day take their life. And that's the decision I made. I decided I was going to take my life. I would sit in my closet where those pictures were, and I'd pull those pictures off to put them on the floor around me. I had a Glock 22 pistol, a 40 caliber pistol. And I tried to build up the courage to put that gun to my head and pull the trigger. I believe it was a divine thing that every time I put that gun to my head, I'd have this vision of how it's going to play out. Like who was going to find me? Somebody's going to hear the gunshot, or you're going to be missing, or just being honest, like I'm in an apartment, you probably start smelling. Like somebody's going to find you, right? It's going to happen. So I thought the only person that had a key to my apartment besides me was my son Hunter. He was 13 at the time, and the thought of my son being part of finding me like that was enough to pump the brakes. But I was in such a dark place, I would be back at it the next day trying again. And it was one of those mornings that I got in this argument with Kathy over the phone. It was enough to alarm her to come over, and she knocked on my door of my apartment while I was in that closet with my pistol in my hand. And I wasn't going to answer her, but when I heard her voice announce herself, I kind of panicked. I actually hid like a little kid getting caught doing something wrong, I hid that pistol under a blanket. She never came in and found it. She was my apartment. But I hid that pistol. I went to the door, and I started in a fight with her. I started yelling at her, really because I was irritated that she came to my apartment to interrupt me about to kill myself, if that makes sense at all. But that's what I was mad at. And we're arguing, and then in the middle of this argument, me screaming at her, she asked me this question that radically changed my life. She asked me how I could do everything I did in the Marine Corps. She saw me become a Recon Marine and go through that training, all these schools and all this hard stuff that I went through, be an MMA fighter, like all this stuff that required so much discipline. She's like, how could you do all of that? And when it comes to your family, you'll quit. And there's no more soul-cutting word to me than to be called a quitter. And she was absolutely right. I had been successful in professional things, but when it came to the most important things, being a husband, being a father, being a young 17-year-old kid that raised his hand and wanted to do something important with his life, I quit on all those things, including my own will to live. And so I made a radical decision in that moment that I was going to get back in the fight. I didn't know how, but I did know I couldn't do it alone. And so Kathy reached out in the church and got in touch with Steve Toth, who's in the front row right here. And Steve Toth met me at a Starbucks coffee shop. And if you guys don't know Steve, he has an incredible gift. He has ADD, really bad. He has no patience at all. And the reason I say it was a gift for me is because I was so manipulative at the moment. I would have said everything he needed to hear in order to win Kathy back. But he has no patience to hear that. So I had written a plan on paper. For those in the military, I wrote a 5-paragraph order, like an operational order of how I was going to fix my life. I remember sliding it over to Steve, and he didn't even look at it. He slid it back over to me and told me I was going to fail. And my first thought was like, what a jerk. Like, I can't believe, like, look at this thing. He is kind of rude still. But so I'm not going to let you off the hook for that just because. But I remember he tapped on that paper and he said, if this plan doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God, I'm not going to waste your time and I'm not going to let you waste mine. And guys, I had tried everything. I had been on other medication. I had been through the programs, the VA programs. I had professional success, financial success. None of those things changed my situation. And it was time for me to try something different. We have a saying at Mighty Oaks Foundation that came from this, right? If what you're doing isn't working, then why not try something different? Everything I tried didn't work. It was time for me to try something different. I trusted Steve. I surrendered my life to Christ, and my life was radically changed. Beyond that decision, Steve mentored me for an entire year in biblical living. And what that really means for me is I was able to take those lessons that I learned from this biblical mentorship and look back at my past and discover that all those incidents in my past, as bad as some of those things were, and I only shared some of those things with you, there's some bad things in my past. As bad as some of those things were, those things didn't lead me to be in that closet with my pistol in my hand. What led me there were the choices that I made in response to those things. And I came to this kind of cliche moment to realize I didn't have to let my past define my future. I could choose a different future moving forward. Did I still deal with anxiety and depression and some of those things from my past, have memories? Of course I did. But how did I respond to them differently was the difference. I made a choice to respond to them in a biblical way as I began to learn these biblical principles. And through that process, my life began to change. And one of those biggest things for me is back, not just because it's the theme right now, but I tell you, one of those biggest things was that saying no to feeling entitled. I felt so entitled to behave the way I was behaving. Like, people don't understand. No one went to Afghanistan. No one had, Foster Harrington, when he died, we were friends for 10 years. We served in the same unit for 10 years together. And he took my spot as a team leader on one of those operations that was shot through the head and died instantly. I'm like, people don't understand that. They can't relate to that. So I had this entitlement. I deserve to be able to behave this way for a little bit. Somebody let me vent, right? And so my family had to deal with it. My wife had to deal with it because I felt so entitled. I didn't want to take personal responsibility for the behaviors I was having. To biblically understand that and start making those adjustments began to bring some tremendous change in my life. And I found restoration in my own brokenness, in my marriage and family. I found hope for the first time in a very long time. And ultimately, I found what I had sought my whole life, and that's purpose. We were created to have purpose. We have to have purpose in our life. If you want to know why 20-plus veterans take their life every day, it's not because of what we've seen or did. It's because we had a very clear mission, a very important purpose. And then one day we woke up and felt like there was no purpose anymore. Mark Twain says it like this: the two most important days in a person's life are the day that they're born and the day that they find out why. When Steve Toth introduced me to a life that I believe I was created to live, I found out the why. And it was to share with others what I had discovered. So many veterans were dealing with the same thing I dealt with, and I felt like I had the answer. Everybody was talking about veteran suicide. Everybody's bringing awareness to it. And I'm all about bringing awareness to a problem, but sometimes you got to bring the solution too. And it was like if I was dying of cancer, and Steve Toth had given me the cure to cancer, I had an obligation to share it. And that manifested in the founding of Mighty Oaks Foundation a little over 10 years ago. And by the way, I give a disclaimer. When we started Mighty Oaks, me and Kathy were not even in the same house back together for a year. We were still bleeding. We probably had no business at all helping anybody else. And people around us recognized that, but they still knew that it was a calling that God put in our life. And we had to be obedient to that calling. And the way God orchestrated with bringing the right people around us and so support the organization and get it started, the first family that was really healed through Mighty Oaks was ours. And then we were able to share it with others. And over the last 10 years, I've been very blessed to share my story on active duty military bases around the world to 250,000 active duty troops. I've written several books. I've given away about 150,000 books to the troops. One of the favorite places I get to do that is the Marine Corps allows me. I'm one of two people. The Marine Corps has allowed me for 6 years now to go to Marine Corps boot camp and speak to these brand new recruits and tell them the truth about that pillar, that spiritual pillar, and what spiritual resiliency is. And they don't have to choose between being a warrior and a man of God. They could be both. In fact, they were created to be both. I'm able to do that. We started a program. We took the year that Steve mentored me, and we made it into a week-long program called a legacy program. I needed a year. Most people need a week. I'm kind of a hard case. We do 35 of those a year, followed up by a mentorship aftercare program. But we do 35 of those a year now. In the last 10 years, we put 4,000 people through it. Active duty military, veterans, spouses, first responders, The military sends all 4 branches, send them on orders. I say all 4. I'm not counting Space Force. We haven't got a Space Force person yet. But they send them on orders to us, and we pay. And I said this earlier for the first time. I say we loosely. You guys pay. A Grateful Nation pays for them to go there. We do about $3.5 million of programming a year, paying for all their flights, their training, everything is all covered. And we've had 4,000 the last 10 years, but now we're doing about 1,000 per year moving forward. And the demand is really increasing, especially right now. We've had 200% increase in the last 2 weeks for Afghanistan veterans for suicide ideations because of Afghanistan. So that program is one of the kind of the core of what we do. And then the successes we've had in that program has allowed me to go to Washington, D.C., testify before Congress and Senate on faith-based programs. In 2009, faith-based programs were pulled out of the VA and DOD. And I was able to work with President Trump, and we got an executive order to bring them back in. President Trump had appointed me. Thank you. President Trump had appointed me to be the chairman of the Faith-Based Coalition for the White House for Veterans Care. And we worked directly with the VA, and I was actually working directly with Deputy Secretary Pam Powers of the VA to help her implement faith programs in the Prevents bill that President Trump had signed. And so we are still, even though the administration's changed, we're still working on that and been very successful with that. So I want to close with this. God's promise of hope and restoration isn't reserved for combat veterans, right? I talked a lot about veterans. It's for everyone, right? It's for everyone. There's a million ways in this world that we can be hurt, that we can find ourselves off track, but I believe there's only one way to get well and to find our purpose, and that's through a relationship with Jesus Christ. Life is hard, and we're all going to find ourselves in the X from time to time. And when you do, and you will, you have to know that God has a plan and promise for your life, whatever your X may be. And you're going to have to say no to entitlement for your own self-pity. You're going to have to say yes to personal responsibility, to doing your part to move forward, and say yes to the promises of God. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and to give you a future. And sometimes that promise will lead you on your knees in prayer. And other times I pray it gives you the very faith you need to reject passivity, to say no to entitlement, and to get off that X and to move forward in the very lives that you were created to live. Can I pray with you? Lord, I'm just so thankful for Pastor Steve and Becky, Steve Toth and Babette. Lord, this church family, the fact that you put it on their heart to raise $66,000 from this church, Lord, to raise to all these other people in the country, Americans that don't even believe the same thing as these Afghans, don't even understand it. Most of them, people here don't even understand Afghanistan, Lord. But you, just human to human, you put a compassion in our hearts to help people that can't help themselves, Lord. That's just such a beautiful thing to me, and just speaks so boldly on who the body of Christ is and should be, Lord. And I just pray that the world sees the love of God and sees you through this effort, Lord, and that you're glorified through this effort to help the Afghans people and get them safe, Lord, and continue to do that. Lord, I just pray for each person here that as they find themselves on the X in life, Lord, that they will have the courage to say no to feel like they're the victim, to say no to being to self-entitlement and self-pity. And they'll say yes to accepting personal responsibility, Lord. And they'll say yes to understanding and living out the promise that you've given them, Lord, through Jeremiah 29:11, Lord, that you would that they will move forward beyond those hardships in the very lives that you created us to live. In Jesus' name, amen.